Drew here, and American Gods, Season 3, Episode 7, Fire and Ice, although not a song of ice and fire, was a pretty solid episode. I feel that the show is getting to a point where it's starting to be more interesting to some fans for its mystery boxes and for its departures from Neil Gaiman's novel than it is for the actual story, which, it was a story that didn't have necessarily the most plot to begin with, but once you stretched it to 3 seasons plus, as it has been, they've had to add to it, and they've found some interesting things to add. I think the most interesting theories I've seen in the past week are for who Shadow's other were, and I kept finding myself buying into someone's arguments for a theory, then hearing someone else's reasons why it's not so, and finding those pretty persuasive as well. And there were a number of theories where I found this to be the case. So in case you didn't watch the episode, Bilquis travels to this destination and meets this woman who turns out to be Shadow's midwife. And after convincing her of her identity, after doing a dance with Oshun and the other Orishas, she manages to talk to this woman who essentially tells her that Shadow was separated from Odin for a reason and that he cannot unite the people until he and the other are reunited. Now, the theories I've heard, I think the worst theory is that Sweeney is the other and that he has to be resurrected and that he's somehow a different god than we've been led to believe so far. I don't think that that one passes the muster. I think the main reason people think this is because you've got Laura, who is constantly carrying around the box of ashes, and you could interpret that to mean, oh yeah, he's coming back and he has importance to the plot. And I am not completely ruling that out, but I tend to suspect that the box of ashes is as much to establish Laura's motivations for making bad business deals with Mr. World. But I digress. Getting back to the theories, I think a slightly better theory that I have heard, is some variation of he is a Norse god, and we haven't figured out which one yet, and perhaps he has a sibling, or Odin has a child that we don't know about yet. A lot of people theorize, of course, that Cordelia could be Persephone, that survived somehow, or she could be some other child of Odin, which is a pretty good theory. I feel like she has to be somebody. I don't think she's just a normal human being, but we'll have to wait and see. I think the most likely theory from my perspective, I brought up on Anansi Boys in the first video reviewing Season 3. I wonder if they're not taking some elements from that story and incorporating them into Shadow's story in American Gods. And if you've read that book, you'll kind of see how this theory makes sense. If you haven't, I don't really want to spoil this show or that book for you. Go read that book. It's a delightful yarn. But I could definitely see them doing this. And given the way that they have Bilquis discovering this piece of information and the fact that they've really done a lot of work to tie into Shadow's African roots this season, I tend to suspect this is more likely what's going on than the other two. But we'll have to wait and see. I don't think anything has been confirmed yet. I think all avenues are open. But let me know your theories in the comments. So I generally thought that this was a solid episode. I thought it ended with some pretty good momentum. As the Justice League trailer has shown us, there's nothing that can't be made more dramatic with a dark Leonard Cohen song, and the Make It Darker song here really did capture a mood. I feel that I perhaps should have seen this twist with Tyr coming. After all, he is a war god. But even last episode, I was talking about how I felt like he seemed like such a nice guy, and it's too bad that Demeter couldn't just go be with him. And lo and behold, it was actually him all the time who was killing Odin's followers. I feel like Johan was a pretty good red herring, and I think that some of the real-life controversy with Marilyn Manson and how they found creative ways to not show his face this episode, at least in some parts of the world. I've heard rumors that in some parts of the world you could see his face in parts of the episode, but I didn't see it. It seemed like they gave him a CGI monster mask in most, if not all, of the scenes that I saw. But I feel like that misdirect of that character kept me from seeing this, that it makes perfect sense that this character Tyr, who is a war god, despite his, demure demeanor, and has baggage with Odin that would very, very much make him, someone that you would suspect of wanting to come after him, that he was the one killing Odin's followers the whole time. And now he's driving off in a car with Shadow, which of course Shadow will come out of this alive, but it's definitely not a great situation. I feel a little bit dumb for not getting it. I know that Denis O'Hare, my alarm bells should have been triggered by the fact that he's played so many creepy and murderous characters, especially on American Horror Story. But for some reason, I just bought into his whole, I'm basically a genial tooth fairy act, and kind of ignored the hints of his more savage nature. So it's going to be interesting. I'm sure we're going to get more insight into what's making him tick and why he's going down this route. Some people have theorized that he could be possessed by some other entity. I could see some things that could be perceived to be evidence of that. I don't think that's what's going on, though. I think it's more likely that he's exactly what he appears to be, and that he just harbored ulterior motives the whole time. And this makes some of the scenes in last episode in particular take on an altogether more sinister light, particularly the scene where he was walking arm in arm with Demeter. And obviously he was never going to be a threat to her since he was pining after her. But it's interesting, seeing the way he was lurking and the way he was looking at Odin and wondering what his ultimate game plan is. Otherwise, this episode, Laura needs to learn some negotiating skills, and she needs to take a lesson or two from Salim, which she doesn't. And this deal that she makes, it feels very, very much like something you would see happen in a fairy tale, making a deal with a god that obviously she's probably not going to be able to follow through on, and there's going to be a lot of repercussions for this. It's going to be interesting. I kind of like that they have Danny Trejo as this iteration of Mr. World, because I think he brings on a very, very sinister aspect to this character. He seems very, very just casually brutal. I also like the way that they have the bloody shark imagery in the background as Laura is making this deal, adding to the tension. They've really, really gone in a different direction from the books, but I think you have to give Laura something other to do than follow Shadow around. So we'll see where this goes. I also thought that the scenes with Bilquis, I've heard some people complain that they seem kind of tangential to the rest of the story, and that we're getting this instead of Mr. Nancy, where Mr. Nancy, had things that were more potent, more powerful to say, whereas basically all we're getting is a bunch of scenes where Bilquis dances around with the Orisha and Oshun and, connects with her heritage. I feel that to a certain extent I can understand both sides of this. I feel that this could be powerful if it connects to Shadow's backstory in a meaningful way. I feel that it is a shame that they couldn't include Mr. Nancy in this season. I feel like, to a certain extent, I think that his role in the story wasn't necessarily... There wasn't any compelling reason to bring him back. I can understand that logic, but I feel like it's pretty obvious given the expanded role that they've given to Bilquis, and given that she wasn't really a major player at this point in the story either, that they easily could have included him in this episode. They easily could have given him more to do over the course of this season, and I think it's kind of shameful that they didn't. I did think that the scene with Bilquis and the Orishas dancing and that connection, the way that they use dance to communicate to this woman, I felt that was actually a pretty moving scene if you just allowed yourself to get caught up in the emotion of it. I think that a lot of people will look at it and say, well, this isn't really saying anything, it's just feel good, exuberance. And I'm like, well, I get that, but I also feel like it's kind of nice to see these characters having these joyful moments. And given that, I've read online, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this culture tends to use dance to communicate. I think that's a powerful way to convey that within the story. And I just thought it was a beautiful moment within the episode. Shadow this episode is continuing to investigate Lakeside and try to figure out what's going on. And I think that even if you haven't read the book at this point, I think it's pretty obvious. I think a lot of people have probably guessed what the twists are here. I don't think it's that hard. I think that they've kind of telegraphed certain things. But assuming not everyone's read the books, I'm not going to spoil anything. But I do think it's interesting that Shadow goes and talks to Hinselman and then goes and turns around and does the exact opposite of what she told him to do. And it's interesting how much he opened up to her, how he seems to think that either he thinks she's trustworthy or he doesn't think she's trustworthy, and he's trying to get her to come out into the open if she has some kind of agenda. Because I think he might be coming to a point where he's starting to sense that not all is as it appears in this town, and potentially not with her. I felt that the scenes between Shadow and Marguerite, I mean, this isn't a romance that I think anyone would be into because of the chemistry, but there was a certain level of magic here. I mean, I'm sure anyone could have a good date given that they were dating someone who is the son of a god with some godlike powers of his own. And I just thought that the cinematography of the snow and the way that it came down on them while they were in the hot tub, and the scenes ice skating out on the lake, there was just some really nice stuff here. And I assume that this relationship is not going to work out. I assume that this is a relationship that the show is using to kind of give Shadow something to do throughout this season as he hangs out in Lakeside. But we'll have to wait and see. Like I said, I feel like they kind of substituted this relationship for his relationship with Lakeside to a certain extent. And I kind of wish that they were taking more time to develop just the character of Lakeside. Maybe I'm not giving them enough credit, but I just don't feel like Lakeside has as much texture as it could have. So overall, really enjoyed this episode. Thought it ended on a strong note with a lot of good teases for what's to come in the rest of this season. This could be it. I really have a feeling that they're not going to get enough ratings to do many more episodes of this. I could see them coming back with like an abbreviated season on a low budget just to give people closure. I think that's kind of a new trend in television these days. But I could also see them just canceling it because the ratings are not good. But let me know what you thought in the comments. If you're interested in seeing my reviews of other upcoming shows, please consider subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching.